There's a certain sound that silence makes when it's about to break. It's not a noise, not really. It's a feeling, a shift in the pressure of the air, a subtle tightening in the atmosphere of a room, of a life. For 25 years, the silence in my home had been a comfortable one, the gentle, sleeping breath of a shared life. But that night, the silence changed. It became a held breath, a secret. I was pulled from a deep, dreamless sleep not by a sound, but by the absence of one. The space in the bed beside me was cold, empty. Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. The digital numbers on my nightstand glowed a relentless red. 7 amperes. Darren was gone, and then I heard it, the murmur. It was a low, urgent sound from the hallway, a secretive hum that was entirely out of place in the deep, dark heart of the night. My body went still, every sense straining. He was on the phone. At this hour? My first sleep-fogged thought was of work, some crisis at the office for the up-and-coming regional manager he was. But his tone, it was all wrong. It wasn't stressed or weary. It was excited. A hushed, fervent excitement that sent a single, cold trickle of dread down my spine. I held my breath, the expensive Egyptian cotton sheets suddenly feeling like a shroud. "We have to do this right," Darren's voice insisted, a little too loud, a little too forceful for a man discussing quarterly reports. "She won't suspect a thing. She—" The word hung in the dark, a poisonous little hook. Who was she? A client? A colleague? A pause. I could picture him, listening intently, his brow furrowed in that way I used to find endearing. Then, the voice that filtered through the solid wood of the door turned my blood to ice. It was tinny and faint, coming from his phone's speaker, but unmistakable. "Of course not, son." Celeste. His mother. A 3 a.m. call to his mother. To plot about a she who wouldn't suspect a thing. The pieces, jagged and wrong, began to tumble in my mind. Our silver wedding anniversary was in just a few weeks. A quarter of a century together. We were supposed to be planning a party, reminiscing about our years, not plotting in the dead of night. The old hardwood floor in the hallway creaked under his weight. Instinct, older than my marriage, took over. I quickly shut my eyes, letting my lashes flutter against my cheeks, forcing my breathing into the slow, deep rhythm of sleep. Pretending to be asleep is an art form every wife masters eventually. You learn to sculpt your breath and still your limbs until you become a convincing statue of slumber. The door clicked open. I felt him hover in the doorway for a moment, a dark silhouette assessing his sleeping wife. Then he crept back to bed. He slipped in carefully, trying not to jostle the mattress, but I could feel the energy radiating from him. His body was stiff, thrumming with a restless tension that was completely alien to our normally peaceful bed. He didn't reach for me. He didn't curl toward my warmth. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, I was sure, his mind a million miles away from me. And in that moment, the silence broke. Not with a sound, but with a realization. The whisper in the dark had become a scream in my soul. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. The next morning, the world had tilted on its axis, but everything looked the same. The sun streamed through the large windows of our Georgetown condo, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It felt like a lie. I moved through the familiar motions in the kitchen, grinding coffee beans, pouring water my hands, performing a pantomime of normalcy. "Naomi, my love." Darren's voice was overly bright, a discordant note in the quiet kitchen. He came up behind me and planted a kiss on my cheek. It felt perfunctory, a dry brush of lips against skin, more a habit than a gesture of affection. And he smelled different. He smelled strongly of a new, expensive cologne. Something sharp and musky. He'd never been a cologne before noon kind of man. I turned, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Morning, you're up early." "Lots on my mind," he said, his eyes skittering away from mine to focus on the coffee machine. "Big projects at work." He leaned against the marble island, watching me. "So, I was thinking, how about we finally choose the restaurant for our anniversary today? I want to take care of it. I want everything to be perfect. Perfect." The word landed in the space between us, heavy and loaded. In 25 years of marriage, Darren had never, ever been this enthusiastic about a family celebration. Birthdays, holidays, even our own past anniversaries, it was always me who organized, who sent the invites, who chose the menu. He would just show up, offering critiques about the wine selection or the background music. This sudden, fervent interest felt like a performance, and I was an unwilling audience member. "Fine," I replied carefully, handing him his mug. "That sounds nice. Any place in mind?" "I'll make some calls," he said, deftly avoiding the question. He took a swift gulp of coffee, scalding his tongue no doubt, and checked his watch. "I should run. Don't want to be late." He gave me another one of those hollow kisses and practically fled from the kitchen. I stood there, listening to the echo of his footsteps in the hallway, the definitive slam of the front door, the roar of his Lexus engine fading down the street, and then the silence returned. But it was different now. It was a watchful silence. It was in that silence that I saw it. His cell phone, black and sleek, was sitting on the nightstand in our bedroom, right where he'd left it after his late-night call. He never forgot his phone. It was practically grafted to his hand. My feet carried me to the bedroom before my mind could fully process the invasion. The screen was face down, but as I watched, it lit up with a soft glow. A notification. A calendar reminder. Call S at 11 a.m. My breath hitched. S. The initial buzzed in my brain, connecting instantly to the she from his conversation. Sanchez? A colleague? It could be nothing. It should be nothing. But the whisper in the dark was now a constant hum in my veins. Later that morning, when he called to, as he said, check in, I decided to test the waters. My voice was light, casual, as I stood watering the ficus tree by the window. "Oh, by the way, your phone was buzzing this morning. A reminder to call someone named S? Everything okay at work?" The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I could practically feel the panic searing through the cellular waves. When he spoke, his voice was a notch too high. "Ah, yes. Sanchez, a colleague from the Seattle office. Just consulting him on a logistical issue. Nothing to worry about." It was a lie. I knew it with every fiber of my being. I knew my husband like I knew the lines on my own palms, and when Darren lied, his left eye always twitched. Just a tiny, almost imperceptible flutter. I couldn't see it, but I could hear it in the strained fabric of his voice. It was twitching now. "I see," I replied, my smile brittle even though he couldn't see it. "Well, I hope you get it sorted out." We hung up, and I placed the watering can down with a hand that was starting to tremble. Deep inside, beneath the practiced calm, my chest tightened into a hard, cold knot of dread. I spent the next hour wandering through the condo, a ghost in my own home. I ended up at the living room window, gazing out at the gray October sky, hanging low over the historic Georgetown rooftops. 25 years, a quarter of a century. We met in college. I was the studious, pragmatic accounting major. He was the charming, ambitious business student, all smiles and big dreams. We married for love, pure and simple. We dreamed of a house full of children, of laughter, of a big, messy, wonderful family. But the children never came. The doctors ran tests on both of us and found nothing conclusively wrong. Unexplained infertility, they called it. A miracle that just never happened. Darren took it hard, retreating into his work. His mother, Celeste, didn't help. Her passive-aggressive comments about the silence in our home, and her friend's darling grandchildren were like tiny constant paper cuts. Over time, we'd made a kind of peace with it. We focused on the positives, more time for our careers, for travel, for each other. But sitting there, watching the gray clouds swirl, I realized that something vital had shifted between us during those years of disappointment. A distance had grown, so slowly, I hadn't even noticed. Until now, it felt like a chasm. A sharp, precise knock on the front door pulled me from my thoughts. It was a knock I knew all too well. One that expected to be answered immediately. I opened the door to find Celeste Price standing there, her lips curved into her usual frigid smile. She was a handsome woman in her 70s, always impeccably dressed, her silver hair styled into a perfect helmet. "Naomi, dear," she said, sweeping past me into the condo without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes did a quick, appraising scan of the entryway. "How are you? I was in the neighborhood. Are you preparing for the party?" In 25 years, Celeste had never once called me daughter. She always treated me with a kind of exaggerated, formal courtesy that was more distancing than any outright rudeness could ever be. "Slowly but surely," I replied, leading her to the living room. "Darren actually wants to celebrate at a restaurant this year. He's taking charge of the arrangements." "Very good," Celeste responded, her voice bright and approving as she settled into my favorite armchair, claiming it as her own. "A respectable venue with all the guests. Doing everything at home just doesn't show the proper weight of the occasion, does it?" She began looking around the living room, her gaze lingering on the art, the furniture, the view. She never said a word of criticism, but I always felt, without a single syllable being spoken, that her suburban mansion was larger, grander, better, that I, by extension, was less. "By the way, Naomi, dear," she said, steepling her fingers, "I've been thinking about the future. Darren is not so young anymore. He's 53. And well, we don't have grandchildren." She let that hang in the air, a familiar, painful sting. "Don't you think it would be a good idea to write a will? For the grandchildren, just in case?" A chill, cold and sharp, traced a path down my spine. "What grandchildren, Celeste?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. "We don't have children." "Well, for my nephews, of course," she said, waving a dismissive hand as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "I have 2 nephews, good boys, studying, working hard. If we don't plan, the government will take everything. It's just practical." I slowly placed my teacup down on the glass coffee table, the click of china on glass sounding like a gunshot in the tense quiet. "And where do you keep the condo papers, by the way?" Celeste asked suddenly, as if it were a casual afterthought. "I'm just thinking about the boys' future. The nephews. The young people." And there it was. The subtext became text. The whisper became a clear, cold statement. This wasn't about wills or nephews. This was about my home. "They're in the safe," I replied, my voice dry and flat. "But why do you ask?" "Oh, just in case," she chirped, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "You never know what might happen. Fire, flood. It's good to know where important things are." When she finally left, the scent of her heavy perfume lingering like a ghost, I sat in the profound silence she left behind. Piece by piece, I started putting it together. The 3 a.m. call with his mother. Darren's strange, uncharacteristic burst of affection. The new cologne. The lie about S. And now, Celeste's pointed, predatory questions about the title to our home. Bit by bit, the puzzle was forming. And I did not like the picture that was emerging. It was a picture of betrayal, cold, calculated, and already in motion. The silver anniversary wasn't a celebration. It was a deadline. And the whisper in the dark had just told me I was running out of time. There's a special kind of silence that fills a home when trust has packed its bags and left. It's not a peaceful quiet. It's a heavy, watchful stillness, where every tick of the clock sounds like a countdown, and every creak of the floorboard is a footstep of doubt. After Celeste left, that was the silence that swallowed me. I sat in the living room for a long time, the dregs of my tea going cold in the cup. Her words echoed in the hollow space. The nephews. The young people. Where are the condo papers? They weren't just questions. They were probes. They were the first, careful taps of a hammer against the foundation of my life, testing for weak spots. I couldn't just sit there. I couldn't just be the naive, trusting wife anymore. The whisper had become a shout, and it was demanding answers. My feet carried me to Darren's study. It was a masculine room, all dark wood and leather, smelling of old books and his cologne. His sanctuary. His computer, a sleek, powerful machine, sat on the large oak desk, a dark screen staring back at me like a dormant eye. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had never snooped. In 25 years, I had respected his privacy. But privacy is a privilege granted by trust, and he had shattered that. This wasn't snooping. This was an investigation. This was survival. I pressed the power button. The machine whirred to life, the screen glowing blue. The password prompt appeared, a blinking cursor, in a stark white box. My first attempt was our old standby, the one he'd used for everything for 2 decades. The date we met, the 1st of September 1999. 090199. Incorrect password. A cold trickle of fear ran down my spine. He'd changed it. He had never changed it before. The simplicity of the password had been a standing joke between us. What if someone hacks you? I'd tease. Who's going to hack an old married man's computer? He'd laugh. Now, he'd changed it. I tried his birthday, nothing. I tried his mother's birthday, a date he used for less important things. Again, nothing. The room felt smaller, the air thinner. Each failed attempt was another lock clicking shut between me and the truth. Then, a thought, dark and cynical, surfaced. What about our wedding date? But not as we wrote it, in reverse, a symbolic little twist for a man who was turning our life upside down. I typed it in, 051198. The screen unlocked. The desktop wallpaper, a generic mountain landscape provided by the computer manufacturer, bloomed into view. He hadn't even bothered with a personal photo. The intimacy of that small detail felt like a slap. My hands were ice cold as I moved the mouse, my cursor hovering over the browser icon. This was it, the point of no return. Once I knew, I couldn't unknow. I took a shaky breath and clicked. The browser history opened, and my world stopped. The list of searches was a brutal, clinical dissection of our marriage. It wasn't a list of queries. It was an indictment. How to divorce when shared assets exist. Spousal rights and property division DC. Legal advice for separation. How to keep the condo in a divorce. Legal tricks for dividing assets. The words swam before my eyes. Each one was a nail in the coffin of our 25 years. He had searched all of this over the past 2 weeks. While he was kissing me good morning, while he was pretending to care about our anniversary plans, his mind was here, in this cold, legal landscape, plotting his escape and his plunder. A painful, metallic taste filled my mouth. I felt the ground lurch beneath my feet. I gripped the edge of the desk, my knuckles turning white as a wave of nausea washed over me. This was real. This wasn't a paranoid fantasy. My husband of a quarter century was meticulously, coldly planning my financial and emotional destruction. With trembling fingers, I scrolled down, page after page of legal websites, forums on divorce tactics, articles on protecting your assets. He was educating himself on how to leave me with as little as possible, how to take the home my parents had given us. The condo. It always came back to the condo. The beautiful, sun-filled space in Georgetown that had been my anchor, my sanctuary. He wanted to pry me out of it like a weed. I was so lost in the horrifying scroll of data that the sound of my cell phone ringing made me jump, my heart leaping into my throat. I fumbled for it, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The screen showed a picture of my friend, Candace, her face smiling, a stark contrast to the grim reality on the computer screen. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I swiped to answer, my voice a strained croak. Candace? Naomi? Oh my God, are you okay? You sound terrible. I'm fine. I lied automatically, the words tasting like ash. Just a little tired. Well, this isn't going to help, she said, her voice dropping into a serious, concerned whisper. Naomi, you are not going to believe what I just saw. My blood ran cold. What? I saw Darren. I'm at Tyson's Galleria, and I saw him at that fancy jeweler, the one with the Italian name. He wasn't alone. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for the impact. Who was he with, Candace? A woman, a young woman. Naomi, she was all over him. Clinging to his arm, hugging him like it was the most natural thing in the world. They were looking at rings. Rings, Naomi. The air left my lungs in a painful rush. The S in his calendar. Sierra. It had to be. It wasn't a colleague. It was a mistress. What did she look like? I asked, my voice strangely soft, detached, as if I were asking about a character in a movie. Oh, honey. She was about 30, I'd say. Blonde. Very put together, wearing a coat that cost more than my monthly mortgage. Pretty, in a sharp, superficial way. Like she'd been polished to a high gloss. And they were so openly affectionate, it was brazen. Are you okay, Naomi? Do you want me to come over? No, I said, the lie coming easier now, fortified by a fresh wave of cold fury. No, it's fine. Everything's fine. But nothing was fine. Nothing would ever be fine again. I hung up the phone and stared blankly at the computer screen, the legal searches now blurring into a meaningless jumble of letters. He wasn't just planning a divorce. He was already living his new life. He was buying jewelry for his girlfriend with one hand while he researched how to financially cripple his wife with the other. The duality of it was breathtaking. The sheer, cold-blooded calculation. I carefully closed the browser, erased the history from the menu, and shut down the computer, leaving it exactly as I found it. The model wife, tidying up after her investigation. The irony was so bitter, it made me want to scream. That evening, Darren returned home, a picture of domestic normalcy. He was carrying a bouquet of deep red roses and a glossy box of fancy chocolates from a boutique I loved. For my one and only true love, he announced confidently, leaning in to kiss my lips. One and only. The words were a grotesque parody. I could almost smell the ghost of Sierra's perfume on him, layered beneath the scent of the roses. I looked at the flowers, at the chocolates, at his smiling, lying face, and all I could see was the price tag, paid for with the money we had saved together. I looked him straight in the eye, my own gaze steady and clear. We need to talk seriously about our future, Darren. I saw it. A subtle tension seized his shoulders, a flicker of panic in his eyes, quickly masked. He turned away from me, grabbing the remote and clicking on the television, filling the room with the inane chatter of a news anchor. Talk about what? He asked, his attention glued to the screen, pretending to be absorbed. Everything's fine, right? The anniversary is in 1 week. All our friends, my boss, your boss. Everyone will be there. Let's not spoil the mood with serious topics now. We'll talk after the party. Okay? After the party. The phrase was a key turning in a lock. That was the deadline. Something big was planned for the party itself. Something he didn't want to spoil by having a real conversation beforehand. I nodded, feigning acceptance, a placid smile on my face. But inside, I felt an icy coldness crystallizing, hardening my heart. After 25 years, I knew this man. He wasn't just being avoidant, He was being strategic. He was preparing something, calmly and coldly, with his mother and his lawyer. He was setting the stage for my final act. But what Darren didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have calculated in his neat little plan, was that I was no longer just the wife. I was no longer the naive woman who trusted him implicitly. He thought he was the only one with secrets. As I watched him pretend to watch TV, a strange, new feeling began to push aside the shock and the hurt. It was a steely, quiet resolve. He had started this war, but he had no idea who he was fighting. The game was on, and for now, I wasn't going to tell him a thing. The human heart is a remarkable organ. It can break, and yet it keeps on beating. It can feel like it's been shredded into a million pieces, and yet it still pumps ice-cold resolve through your veins. The shock of the day had settled into a hard, dense weight in my chest. The grief was there, a vast, dark ocean waiting to pull me under, but for now, a dam of pure survival instinct was holding it back. I moved through the next morning like an automaton, making coffee, toast, the mundane rituals of a life that no longer existed. Darren left early, again without breakfast. "Big meeting," he said, barely making eye contact as he headed for the door. He was dressed with extra care, I noticed. A new tie. The sharp, expensive cologne was back. "A meeting?" I asked, my voice carefully neutral. "Yeah, with some partners. Going over the Q4 projections. Might run late." I just nodded. Partners. The word was a sick joke. I knew exactly who his partner was. Sierra, the blonde from the jewelry store. I pictured them in a hotel room, or maybe at a cozy cafe, his hand on hers, planning their future while he meticulously planned the end of mine. The silence after he left was deafening. I was cleaning up the breakfast dishes when the landline phone on the kitchen wall rang, its old-fashioned jangle startling in the quiet. We barely used it anymore. I didn't move to answer it. I just stood there, my hands submerged in soapy water, and listened. After 4 rings, the answering machine clicked on. My own voice, recorded years ago, cheerful and utterly naive, filled the room. "You've reached the Price residence. Please leave a message." A beep. Then, a voice that made my blood freeze mid-circuit. It was Celeste. Her tone was low, conspiratorial. It's Mom. Pick up if you're there." A pause. "Okay, well, I spoke to Mr. Hayes. Everything can be arranged. The important thing is that she doesn't suspect anything until the very last moment. Call me when you're free." Click. The line went dead. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the edge of the sink, the sudsy water sloshing over my wrists. Mr. Hayes. The supposed colleague from Seattle. The lawyer. Now it all made sense. A sick, horrifying sense. Celeste's message wasn't just a confirmation, it was a blueprint. She doesn't suspect anything until the very last moment. The anniversary party, it had to be. That was the last moment. They were going to spring the trap when I was most vulnerable, surrounded by everyone we knew. I felt the ground give way beneath me, not in a physical sense, but in a profound, existential one. 25 years, a quarter of a century beside a man I had loved, built a life with, struggled alongside. And he was planning my betrayal with the same detached efficiency he used for office paperwork. I was a problem to be managed. A nuisance to be removed. My eyes fell on the kitchen counter. Darren's cell phone was there, left behind again. He'd placed it face down. A habit he'd recently developed, I realized. To hide the screen, to hide her. A cold, clear purpose washed over me. The time for passive discovery was over. I walked to the counter and picked up the phone. It was warm from the charger. The screen was black. It required a 6-digit code. My first attempt was the date we met. 090199. Incorrect. I tried Celeste's birthday. 112045. Incorrect. Panic began to prickle at the edges of my resolve. What was it? What number held the key to his new secret life? And then I remembered the blonde from the jeweler's. Young, polished, the kind of woman who would expect to be celebrated. My intuition, that wounded but sharpening instrument, whispered a date. A day for women. A day a man like Darren might use to flatter a younger mistress. I typed in 0308. March 8th. International Women's Day. The screen unlocked. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I felt dizzy. I was in the sanctum of his deceit. I went straight to his messages. And there she was. At the top of the list, Sierra. A heart emoji, next to her name. I opened the thread, and I read every single damning, intimate, cruel word. Darren, Sierra, my love, just a little more patience. After the anniversary, everything will be resolved. The condo will be ours. Sierra D., you said we'd be living together by New Year's. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of being your secret. Darren, my love, everything is going according to plan. Mom has already taken care of things. Naomi suspects nothing. Sierra, and the lawyer? What does he say? Darren, Hayes says if we play this right, she'll only get half. I'll keep the condo. I slumped into a kitchen chair, the phone clutched in my shaking hand. They were planning my life as if I were a piece of second-hand property. Darren, his mother, the lawyer Hayes, the mistress Sierra. They were a four-headed monster, and I was the princess trapped in the tower of my own marriage. I kept scrolling, my stomach churning. Darren, hey Mom. Are you sure the condo title is in both our names? Maybe we got lucky and it's just mine. Celeste. Son, I saw the copies when you bought it. Both names are on it. But Hayes says there are ways. The important thing is she signs the waiver. Darren. And if she won't sign? Celeste, she will sign. After what we're going to do to her at the party, she won't have any other option. The phone nearly slipped from my grasp. After what we're going to do to her, what? What did they plan to do to me? A public accusation? A fabricated scandal? My mind raced through terrible possibilities. Would they claim I was unfaithful, unstable? My anxiety rose, a bitter tide in my throat. They were going to humiliate me, to break me so completely in front of our friends, our colleagues, that I would be too shattered to fight back. I would sign anything just to make it stop. I couldn't fall apart. Not now, not yet. With a surgeon's precision, I began taking pictures of the most incriminating messages with my own phone. I documented every plot, every lie, every cold-hearted exchange. I captured the one where Darren confirmed his mother's involvement, the one where he discussed legal strategy with Hayes, the one where he promised Sierra my home. I created a digital trail of their conspiracy. When I was done, I carefully deleted the evidence of my snooping from his phone, the open message thread, the photos I'd taken. I placed it back on the counter, face down, exactly as I had found it. I was no longer just a betrayed wife. I was a spy in my own home, and I had just secured my first major intelligence. I needed a plan. More than that, I needed help. I needed someone who operated in the cold, hard world of facts and law, not the emotional wreckage Darren had left behind. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts, my finger stopping on a name I hadn't dialed in too long. Aisha Cole, my college roommate. The brilliant, fierce woman who had become one of the city's top family law attorneys. Our friendship had survived distance and different life paths, maintained through occasional lunches and unwavering mutual respect. She answered on the second ring. Naomi? Long time no talk. How are you? Her voice was warm, professional. Aisha, I said, and my carefully constructed composure cracked. A single, traitorous tear escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. I took a steadying breath. Can we meet today? I need a consultation. There was a beat of silence on the other end. She heard it. the tremor, the desperation. "Sure, I'm free at 6. Come to the office, we'll talk." Aisha's office was in a gleaming downtown high-rise, a world of glass, steel, and quiet power. She greeted me with a firm, familiar hug, but her sharp, intelligent eyes immediately saw past my calm facade. She saw the tension in my shoulders, the shadows under my eyes. "Sit down," she said, guiding me to a plush chair opposite her minimalist desk. "Tell me everything. What happened?" I took a deep breath, the dam threatening to break. "Let's just say, an acquaintance of mine is having trouble with her husband." The old, stupid instinct to hide the shame, to cloak it in hypotheticals, was still there. "He wants a divorce, but he's hiding it. And it seems he's setting a trap for her." Aisha leaned forward, her elbows on the desk, her gaze intent and unwavering. "You sure this is a hypothetical acquaintance, Naomi?" I held her look for a few seconds, and the last of my defenses crumbled. The words tumbled out in a raw, unedited torrent. I told her everything. The 3 a.m. calls, the changed computer password, the legal searches, Candace's sighting at the jewelry store, Celeste's probing questions, the answering machine message, and finally, the text messages: Sierra, the condo, the plan for the party, the lawyer Hayes. I showed her the photos on my phone. Aisha listened, her face a mask of professional calm, occasionally asking a clarifying question. "When did you buy the condo? Whose name is on the title? Are you formally employed?" When I finished, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the city below. I felt drained, hollowed out, but also, for the first time, slightly lighter. The secret was out. Aisha sat back, steepling her fingers. "I understand," she said finally, her voice firm and clear. "This is serious, Naomi, but you are not lost. The good news is you reacted in time." "What do I do?" I asked, my voice small. "They can't do anything to you if you keep a clear head," she stated. "In a divorce, you receive what is legally yours. No one can force you to waive your share. But it's clear they are planning something dirty. They want to put you in a weak emotional position, a public scandal, a false accusation, something to make you feel so broken and ashamed that you'll sign anything just to make it stop. How do I prepare?" I asked, my own voice gaining a sliver of her steel. "Gather evidence. You've already started. Keep those messages safe. Record conversations with them if you can. DC is a one-party consent state. Move some of the money from your joint savings into an account in your name only. Protect your financial footing." She leaned forward, her eyes locking with mine. "But most importantly, Naomi, you cannot let them know that you know. You have to play your part. Be the naive wife they think you are, let them get overconfident. Their arrogance is your greatest weapon right now." I nodded, the plan solidifying in my mind. For the first time in days, I felt something close to relief. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't hope. It was the grim satisfaction of a soldier who has finally been given a map of the battlefield. "Thanks, Aisha. How much do I owe you?" She waved a dismissive hand, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time. "Nothing, girl. Friends don't charge. Just keep me in the loop." She stood up and came around the desk, putting a hand on my shoulder. "And remember, no matter what happens, you are not alone. And you are not defenseless." I left her office as evening settled over the city, the twinkling lights no longer seeming mocking, but like 1,000 tiny watchful eyes. I had a plan. I had an ally. I had evidence. I returned home determined to act. But what I found upon arrival confirmed that the war had already begun, and the first shots had been fired. Darren was standing by the entrance hall mirror, adjusting his hair. He turned as I came in, and his eyes swept over me with a critical, cold assessment I had never seen before. "You look kind of run down today, huh?" he blurted out, not looking at me directly. "Forgive me for saying it, but yes, Naomi, you've let yourself go a bit lately." I stood frozen, my purse still in my hand. Look, he continued, his tone dripping with false concern. Turning 50 isn't the end of the world, but you need to take care of yourself. Go to the gym, see a dermatologist. Get something done. I saw Candace's daughter today. She's 30 but looks 25, very polished. And you? Well, you understand. He was comparing me to younger women. He was setting the stage, just as Aisha had said. He was prepping the audience for his betrayal, creating a narrative. I had to leave her. She let herself go. I deserve someone who takes care of themselves. The cruelty was so calculated, so deliberate, it took my breath away. I have a meeting tomorrow, he announced suddenly. It's Saturday, but it will take all day. Another date with Sierra. That's fine, I replied, my voice calm, my face a placid mask. And Sunday, I'm going with Mom. Going to set up her new smart TV. Spending the weekend with his co-conspirators, the Trader's family. That night, when Darren was in the shower, I did exactly what Aisha had advised. I logged into our joint bank account online, and my blood ran cold. In the last month, over $30,000 had been withdrawn in several large transactions. Transfers to unfamiliar accounts. Large cash withdrawals. Payments to a H&H legal consultancy. Gifts for Sierra. Payments to Hayes. They were using our money, the money I had helped save and manage for 25 years, to fund my own destruction. I let out a sound then, a nervous, brittle laugh that was dangerously close to a sob. They were using my own money to plan my downfall. But as I sat there in the glow of the laptop screen, a strange smile touched my lips. They thought they held all the cards. They thought I was a fool. They had no idea about the ace I was about to play. There is a strange power that comes from knowing you are being hunted. The fear doesn't vanish, but it transforms. It sharpens your senses. It focuses your mind. It turns you from prey into a strategist. After my meeting with Aisha, the fog of shock and heartbreak began to lift, replaced by the cold, clear air of a battlefield. Darren's cruel comments about my appearance were no longer just hurtful words, they were intelligence. His weekend meetings were not just betrayals, they were opportunities. Every lie he told was a gift, another piece of evidence I could quietly collect. The first order of business was financial. Aisha's advice echoed in my mind: protect your financial footing. While Darren was out on Saturday, presumably wining and dining Sierra on our dime, I was at my bank downtown, sitting across from a polite, efficient account manager. I'd like to open a new checking and savings account, I said, my voice calm and steady. Solely in my name. Of course, Mrs. Price, will you be transferring any initial funds? I gave her a number. A significant one. Exactly half of the balance from our joint savings account. It wasn't about greed. It was about preservation. It was about ensuring that when Darren finally made his move, he couldn't drain our shared resources completely, leaving me with nothing to fight back with. If he wanted to continue funding his new life, he would have to do it with his half. The manager tapped at her keyboard. And the reason for the transfer? Just for our records. I met her gaze evenly. Estate planning. It wasn't entirely a lie. I was planning for my future. A future that, for the first time, I was starting to believe I would have to face alone. The transactions went through without a hitch. Watching the numbers shift on the screen, a sliver of my power returned to me. It was a small, silent victory, but it was mine. Next was the evidence. Aisha had said to record conversations if I could. The opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. On Sunday afternoon, Celeste stopped by again, this time with a casserole dish she'd accidentally made too much of. It was a transparent excuse to check on me, to see if her son's psychological warfare was having an effect. I let her in, playing my part to perfection. I looked tired, I was a little withdrawn. The picture of a woman who was letting herself go, completely oblivious to the storm gathering around her. "Oh, you look peaky, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she placed the dish on the counter. "Is everything all right? Darren mentioned you seemed a bit down lately." My phone was on the kitchen island, just a few inches from my hand. I casually opened the voice memo app and pressed record, then set it back down, screen side up. "Nothing to see here, just a wife's phone. I'm fine, Celeste," I said, my voice deliberately soft, a little fragile. "Just a lot on my mind with the anniversary party. Darren is being so secretive about it. He wants everything to be a surprise." I was baiting her, and she took it. "Oh, a surprise is good," she chirped, her eyes glinting. "A man should take charge. It shows he's invested. It's so important for a couple to present a united, happy front to the world, don't you think? Especially at a milestone like this. It sets the tone for the future." The subtext was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The future. Their future. The one that didn't include me. "I suppose so," I murmured, looking down at my hands. "It's just, he's been so distant. Spending so much time at work. Or with you." I let the sentence hang, a perfect blend of wifely concern and naive confusion. Celeste moved closer, putting a cold, manicured hand on my arm. It took everything in me not to flinch. "Naomi, dear," she said, her voice dropping into a confidential whisper that was being perfectly captured by my phone. "Men, they go through phases, they need their space. They need to feel unburdened. The important thing is that you don't make a scene. You be the graceful, understanding woman he married. No matter what happens, you must remember your dignity." I looked up at her, widening my eyes slightly. "What do you mean, no matter what happens?" She patted my arm and withdrew her hand, her smile serene and utterly monstrous. "Oh, you know, life is full of surprises. Just remember what I said, grace and dignity. It will make everything so much cleaner." I had heard enough. I had her on record, subtly coaching me to be compliant in the face of an undisclosed catastrophe. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, and it was now saved in my digital vault. "Thank you, Celeste," I said, my voice trembling with a performance of gratitude. "That's very good advice." After she left, I saved the recording and backed it up to a secure cloud drive Aisha had recommended. I felt a grim sense of accomplishment. I was building my case, brick by brick. That evening, Darren returned from his mother's, smelling of her perfume and his own self-satisfaction. He was in a jovial mood, which for him, lately, meant he was deep in his deception. "So Mom said she stopped by," he said, loosening his tie. "Said, you seemed a little out of sorts." I was in the living room, pretending to read a book. I looked up and gave him a small, weary smile. "Just tired, that's all." She was very supportive. He nodded, looking relieved. He believed the act. He believed his mother had successfully managed the problem me. "Good, that's good. She cares about you, you know." The lie was so colossal it was almost impressive. I simply nodded and went back to my book, the words a meaningless blur on the page. Later, as he snored softly beside me, I lay awake in the dark, my mind racing. I had taken Aisha's advice. I had moved money. I had gathered evidence. I was playing my part. But it felt reactive. I was building a defense, but I was still waiting for their attack. I needed an advantage they couldn't possibly foresee. I needed my own surprise. And then I remembered the letter. A week ago, a thick, formal envelope had arrived from Germany. In the chaos of Darren's betrayal, I had almost forgotten about it. It was from a notary in Munich. My father's older sister, my Tante Josephine, had passed away. She was a formidable, independent woman I hadn't seen in years, but with whom I had exchanged letters and the occasional email. She never married, had no children. The letter stated, in dense, legal German, and an accompanying English summary, that I was her sole heir. At the time, I had been too wrapped up in the fantasy of surprising Darren with the news on our anniversary. a bittersweet gift from the universe to celebrate our enduring love. The irony was so painful it was almost funny. Now, I slipped out of bed and padded quietly to my home office, retrieving the envelope from the back of a filing cabinet. I sat at my desk, the only light from the small lamp, and carefully reread the summary. The list of assets made my head spin. A condominium in central Munich, valued at approximately $800,000 USD. A bank account with a balance of €520,000, roughly $570,000 USD. A luxury investment condominium in Miami Beach, Florida. Total estimated value of the estate, over $3 million USD. I stared at the numbers, my heart pounding not with joy, but with a fierce, blazing hope. This wasn't just money. This was a life raft. This was a fortress. This was freedom. Darren's plan was to leave me with half of a weekend cabin and a mountain of humiliation. He had no idea I was about to become a multimillionaire. A wild, almost giddy laugh bubbled up in my throat, which I quickly stifled. This changed everything. This was my ace. But I couldn't play it yet. I had to be smart. I had to secure this inheritance before Darren could get his hands on a single cent of it. I opened my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating my determined face. I began researching. How to formally accept a German inheritance as a U.S. resident. How to transfer large sums of money internationally. How to title foreign property in a way that would protect it from a divorcing spouse. I worked for hours, until the sky outside began to lighten from black to deep blue. I was no longer the victim. I was the architect of my own escape. When Darren's alarm went off at 6:30 a.m., I was already back in bed, feigning sleep. He shuffled off to the shower, none the wiser, as the water in the ran. I opened my eyes and looked at the dawn breaking through the window. The first line of defense was firmly in place. I had protected my money. I had evidence of their conspiracy. And I had discovered my secret weapon. The hunted was ready to become the hunter. Let them have their party. Let them think they were in control. They were about to learn that the quiet, boring wife they had so underestimated was the most dangerous player in their game. There is a peculiar stillness that comes with a secret of this magnitude. It sits inside you, not as a weight, but as a core of molten steel, solidifying your spine and sharpening your gaze. For the next few days, I moved through my life with Darren as if I were an actor in a meticulously rehearsed play. I said my lines, I smiled my smiles, I played the part of the slightly weary, unsuspecting wife. But underneath, I was a vault, and inside that vault was a fortune that would change everything. The knowledge of the inheritance was my constant companion. It whispered to me while Darren complained about work. It hummed in my veins when Celeste called with another helpful suggestion for the party. It was my shield against their condescension and my fuel for the quiet, furious work I was doing. My first step was the German consulate. I needed to formalize my status as Tante Josephine's heir. I took a personal day from work, telling Darren I had a routine doctor's appointment. The lie came easily now, a necessary tool in my arsenal. The consulate was a solemn, official place, all polished wood, and the faint scent of old paper. The consul, an older gentleman with a neatly trimmed white beard and kind eyes behind his spectacles, reviewed my documents with painstaking care. He looked from the German death certificate and will to my passport, his expression unreadable. "Everything appears to be in perfect order, Mrs. Sterling," he said finally, his voice a soft, cultured baritone. He used my maiden name, the one on my birth certificate, and the sound of it felt like a homecoming. "Your aunt was a very prudent and organized woman. She made this process very straightforward for you." A wave of gratitude for my formidable Tante Josephine washed over me. Even in death, she was offering me a lifeline. "The bank accounts will be unlocked and transferred to an account of your designation within 1 week." He continued, stamping a document with a definitive thud. "And regarding the property in Miami Beach, the title has already been transferred to your name. The management company has been notified. Here are the keys and the deed. You may dispose of it as you wish." He slid a large envelope across the desk. Inside were the official, stamped deeds and a set of keys that felt heavy with possibility. I carefully placed them in my bag, my hands steady. I now officially owned 3 properties and was about to have over $1 million in liquid assets. The sheer scale of it was dizzying. "Thank you," I said, my voice calm despite the storm of triumph roaring inside me. "My condolences for your loss," he replied with a slight formal bow of his head. "And my congratulations on your inheritance. Use it well." My next stop was the bank. Not the local branch where Darren and I had our joint accounts, but the main downtown office where I had opened my private account. I met with a young, sharp-eyed financial advisor named Chloe. "I need to open an account that can hold euros," I told her, sliding the consulate's documents across her desk. "And I will be receiving a significant international wire transfer in the coming days." Chloe's eyes widened almost imperceptibly as she scanned the papers, the numbers clearly making an impression. "Wow," she said, a professional smile quickly replacing her surprise. "You did very well with this inheritance, didn't you?" "Yes," I said, returning her smile. This one was genuine. My aunt was an incredible woman. We filled out the paperwork. As I signed my friend, name Naomi Sterling on the dotted line, I felt another layer of Darren's world slough away. I was no longer Naomi Price, the betrayed wife. I was Naomi Sterling, a wealthy, independent woman. Leaving the bank, I felt as if I were floating a few inches above the pavement. The weight of 25 years of compromise, of quiet sacrifices, of being part of a "we" had lifted. For the first time in decades, I was just me. And me was formidable. But the universe, it seemed, wanted to remind me exactly what I was fighting against. I had decided to swing by the Watergate Hotel, to see the stage where Darren planned to orchestrate my downfall. I wanted to look the battlefield in the eye. The hotel was as opulent as I remembered. I was walking through the grand lobby, heading toward the ballroom wing, when I saw her. There, standing near a gigantic floral arrangement by the entrance to the main ballroom, was a young blonde woman in an unmistakably expensive cream-colored coat, Sierra. She was talking on her phone, her back partly to me, her voice a sickly sweet, carrying murmur. "Dee, my love, it's incredible." She was gushing. "The ballroom is huge. The decor is just divine. You promised we'd live in a huge condo soon, and I can already imagine hosting parties there." My feet rooted to the marble floor. She was here, touring the venue of my humiliation, already planning her housewarming in my home. The audacity was breathtaking. She was pretty, I had to admit. But as she turned slightly, I saw what Candace had meant. Her beauty was sharp, manufactured. Her eyes, even from a distance, looked empty and calculating, like a doll's eyes. "Of course, I understand tomorrow will be difficult for you," she continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial purr. "But you said after your speech she'd understand everything, and I'll be there as your new assistant. It's so romantic, isn't it?" Romantic. Publicly destroying your wife of 25 years was romantic. I felt a fresh surge of that cold, hard steel in my core. I found myself walking toward her. I needed to see her up close. I needed to look into the eyes of the woman who was so casually helping to dismantle my life. "Excuse me," I said, my voice polite and neutral. "Do you know where the banquet manager's office is?" Sierra turned, her eyes sweeping over me with a look of pure, unadulterated disdain. She took in my simple, understated business attire and dismissed me instantly. "No idea," she replied coldly, her voice like shards of ice. "I don't work here." She turned back to her phone. "Dee, there's some lady asking me questions here." "Okay, see you tonight." "I love you." "Some lady." A grim smile touched my lips as I walked away. "Oh, you have no idea, sweetheart," I thought. "Tomorrow, some lady is going to deliver a surprise you'll never forget." I found the banquet manager, a kindly, plump woman named Maria, who who greeted me with a warm smile. "Ah, Mrs. Price. So lovely to meet you. Your husband has been so thorough. Everything is paid for and confirmed. The ballroom for 100, the 5-course banquet, the live quartet. It's going to be a beautiful evening." "And how much did all this cost, if you don't mind me asking?" I asked, feigning wifely concern about expenses. "Let's see." She consulted her clipboard. The total came to $45,000. Mr. Price insisted on the best of everything. $45,000. He was spending $45,000 of our shared money to publicly execute our marriage. To humiliate me in front of 100 people. The number was so obscene it was almost funny. "I see." I nodded. "Can I see the ballroom?" It was breathtakingly luxurious. High, coffered ceilings, glittering crystal chandeliers, tables draped in immaculate white linen, and enormous gilt-framed mirrors on the walls. It was a stage set for a fairy tale. Or, in my case, a horror story. Every guest would have a perfect, unobstructed view of the spectacle. "Where will the microphone be for the toasts?" I asked. "Right here in the center of the dance floor," Maria said, pointing. Mr. Price was very specific. He wanted to make sure everyone could hear him perfectly. Of course he did, I thought, so no one would miss a single humiliating word. When I returned home, Darren was already there, pacing the living room nervously. He had a piece of paper in his hand, his speech, no doubt. He quickly shoved it into his pocket when he saw me. "Ah, Naomi. Where were you?" "At the restaurant checking on everything," I said, hanging up my coat. "What did you think?" he asked, a nervous edge to his voice. "Impressive. $45,000 for one night. Is quite a statement." His face tightened. "Seriously, Naomi, don't start. The money is there. The important thing is to make a good impression on the guests. Or on the mistress," I thought. That night, Celeste arrived, practically vibrating with excitement. "Son, are you ready? Did you rehearse your speech?" "Of course, Mom. Everything will be perfect. Don't worry." She patted his shoulder, a triumphant gleam in her eye. "Your speech will be a success. Everyone will see that you made the right decision." The right decision. I watched them from the kitchen doorway. The two architects of my ruin, and the cold steel inside me turned to ice. "Mom, what if she makes a scene?" Darren asked, a sliver of his anxiety showing. "She won't," Celeste replied with utter confidence. "With so many people there, she'll hold it together. She's an educated woman, she'll be reasonable, you'll settle things quietly at home afterward." "And Hayes? Is he ready?" "Yes," Darren said, his voice dropping. "The papers are done. All she needs to do is sign. After my speech, she'll have no choice." I slipped away quietly, back to our bedroom. I went to my dresser and took my own set of papers from the bottom drawer. The document from Mr. Perry confirming the condo was my premarital asset, the inheritance papers from the consulate, the statement for my new, very healthy bank account. I placed them all into a slim, elegant leather folder. Tomorrow, this folder would be my Excalibur. Tomorrow, the truth would not just set me free, it would annihilate them. Later, when the apartment was quiet, I heard Darren in his study, murmuring. I crept to the door and listened. "Dear friends," he was rehearsing in a low voice, "today is a special day. 25 years ago I made a decision that seemed right. But life moves on, people change, and sometimes you have to have the courage to admit your mistakes." Mistakes. Our life together was his mistake. I thank Naomi for these years, but honesty demands I speak the truth. We are different people, and I have made a decision. I didn't need to hear the rest. The meaning was clear. I returned to bed, but sleep was impossible. In the dark, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The game board was set. Darren, Celeste, and Sierra were moving their pieces, confident of their checkmate. They just didn't know I was playing a completely different game, and I held all the aces. The morning of the anniversary dawned bright and clear, a cruel parody of a perfect day. I woke up before my alarm. The silence of the bedroom pressed thick and heavy around me. Darren was already awake, I could feel it. The tension radiating from his side of the bed was a live wire. Today was the day he would finally spring his trap, he thought. I lay still, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, so familiar and yet suddenly the breathing of a stranger, a predator sharing a den with his prey. But the prey was wide awake, and she had grown claws of her own. "Naomi," he said, his voice artificially bright as he swung his legs out of bed. "Today is a great day." "Yes," I replied, my voice calm and even. "Our anniversary." "Not just that," he said, smiling a strange, tight smile into the mirror as he adjusted the collar of his robe. "Tomorrow, your life is going to change. And so is mine, completely." Completely. He had no idea. "Completely?" I asked, sitting up. "Dee, can I ask you a question?" "Sure," he said, his attention on his reflection. "What is it? Did you ever really love me? Truly?" He froze, his hand stilling on the silk of his robe. He turned, his face a mask of bewildered irritation. "What a weird question. Why are you asking that on such an important day?" "Just curious." "Of course I loved you," he said, the words rushing out too fast. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "And I still love you, in my own way." In his own way. Like a man loves an old armchair, comfortable, familiar, but ultimately something to be replaced with a newer, shinier model. "I understand," I said quietly. He spent the day in a state of frantic, nervous energy. He called the restaurant 3 times, confirmed the guest list, barked orders into his phone. By evening, he was visibly anxious, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to fix his cufflinks. "Are you ready, Naomi?" he asked, his voice tight. I stood before the full-length mirror in our bedroom. I was wearing a new dress, a stunning, elegant sheath in a deep, royal blue that made my eyes look like sapphires. I had bought it for this day, a final gift to myself before the world ended. Now, it felt like a suit of armor. "Ready," I said, turning to face him. "Then let's go," he said, a grim determination settling on his features. "It's time for the truth to be known." The truth. Oh, how I agreed. I picked up my small, beaded clutch from the bed. It was heavier than it looked. Inside, nestled beside my lipstick and phone, was the slim leather folder. My truth. My redemption. "Yes," I said, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "It's time for everyone to know the truth." We didn't speak during the drive to the Watergate. The silence in the luxurious car was a chasm, wider and deeper than any that had come before. 25 years ago we'd driven to the courthouse in a similar silence, but that one had been brimming with excitement, with hope, with a future we were rushing toward together. This silence was the void left after that future had been incinerated. "Naomi," Darren said as the hotel valet opened my door, "no matter what happens today, I want you to know that I wish you the best. The best." The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of that wish almost made me laugh. He was wishing me the best moments before he planned to destroy me. "Thank you, Dee," I replied, a serene, almost beatific smile on my face. "And I wish you receive exactly what you deserve." He flinched, just a tiny, almost imperceptible twitch, before his public mask slid back into place. The ballroom was a vision of opulent perfection, just as I had seen it. It sparkled and gleamed, 100 guests mingling under the soft glow of chandeliers, their laughter and chatter creating a festive hum. Round tables were adorned with centerpieces of white roses and gold candles. It was a scene from a dream. At the head table sat our places. The hosts, the happy couple. I moved through the room, a gracious smile fixed on my face, accepting congratulations, shaking hands. 25 years, how wonderful! You two are an inspiration. The words were like darts, each one pricking the fragile bubble of my composure, but I did not let it pop. Inside, I was a coiled spring, tense and ready. And then I saw them. The players in this little drama, all assembled for the final act. In one corner, sipping champagne and chatting calmly with a group of Darren's colleagues, was Sierra. She was introduced as his new marketing assistant. She looked stunning in a shockingly expensive, form-fitting red dress. Young, vibrant, a living, breathing symbol of everything I was not. Darren's boss, Mr. Michael Boudreau, clapped him on the back. "Darren, congratulations. Rarely does one see such solid couples these days." "Thank you, Mr. Boudreau," Darren replied, shaking his hand with a firm, confident grip. "Today is a very special day. I even prepared a very special speech." My throat went dry. This was it. Celeste Price floated from table to table, a queen holding court, receiving compliments on her wonderful son and the ideal wife he had chosen. Her eyes glowed with a triumphant satisfaction that made my stomach turn. She knew what was coming. She was savoring it. And then I saw him, at a small table in the back, sitting alone and looking profoundly serious, was a man in his 50s in a dark, conservative suit. I didn't know him, but I recognized him from the pictures I'd found online. Mr. Hayes. The lawyer, he was here, waiting in the wings. The vulture circling, ready to descend with his papers the moment I was broken. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone. The sound echoed through the ballroom, hushing the crowd. "Dear guests, may I have your attention, please?" Darren would like to say a few words in honor of his lovely wife, Naomi, on this, their silver anniversary. A wave of affectionate applause swept through the room. Everyone turned, beaming, toward our table. Darren stood up, adjusted his tie, and took the microphone. He smiled broadly, the picture of a proud, successful husband. "Friends, family, colleagues, thank you all for being here on this important day." His voice was smooth, confident, amplified through the speakers. 25 years is no small thing. It's a quarter of a century alongside one person. Heads nodded, glasses were raised. "I've thought a lot about our life together," he continued, his smile becoming wistful. "About what united us, what made us happy, and what didn't so much." The room grew a little quieter. A few confused glances were exchanged. "And I realized something very important," Darren said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "People change. What seems right when you're young can eventually turn out to be a mistake." A soft collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. "Darren," I murmured, loud enough for those nearby to hear, "what are you talking about?" "The truth, dear," he said, turning to look at me, his eyes cold and flat. "It's time to stop lying to ourselves." He turned back to the guests, his voice firm and unyielding. "Dear friends, I want to be honest with you, and with myself. For 25 years, I endured a life with a woman who is not right for me. A gray, boring woman who doesn't know how to be the partner of a successful man." The ballroom erupted in a wave of shocked murmurs. "Darren, are you crazy?" someone yelled from the back. "Quite the opposite," he said calmly, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "I'm finally thinking clearly. Naomi needs to understand this. Our marriage is over. I'm filing for divorce." The room was stunned into a profound, horrified silence. People stared, mouths agape. Celeste's triumphant smile was now a full-blown, gloating grin. "Furthermore," Darren continued, emboldened by the shock he was causing, "I want a fair division of assets. Naomi must leave the condo. It's time for a new life, new relationships." He looked pointedly at Sierra, who stood in the back, barely able to conceal her victorious smirk. "Is this a joke?" a woman's voice asked, bewildered. "Are you in your right mind, Darren?" His boss, Mr. Boudreau, demanded, his face like thunder. More than ever, Darren replied coldly. I have the right to be happy, and I'm going to exercise it. Naomi will receive what the law dictates, and we will separate on good terms. And that young girl is your new conquest? One of my friends shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Sierra. Sierra is a wonderful woman, Darren said openly, his arrogance reaching its peak. She understands what I need, unlike other people. That was enough, the final unforgivable blow. The room held its breath, every eye fixed on me, waiting for the tears, the collapse, the frantic run from the room. Instead, I slowly, deliberately, rose from my chair. The silence was absolute, a physical presence in the room. I walked toward my husband, my heels clicking softly on the polished floor. I gently took the microphone from his stunned, slackened grip. He was so shocked, he didn't resist. I turned to face the 100 pairs of staring, horrified eyes. I saw the confusion, the pity, the outrage. I saw Celeste's smile falter. I saw Sierra's smirk vanish. I brought the microphone to my lips. Thank you, Darren, I said, my voice quiet, clear, and sweet as poisoned honey. Very honest. I let the silence hang for a beat, letting the tension coil to its breaking point. You know, dear friends, I continued, my gaze sweeping over the crowd. Darren is right about one thing. Enough of the lies, and I want to speak the truth, too. Darren frowned, confused. This was not in his script. The truth is, I said, my voice gaining strength, ringing through the ballroom, I knew about this whole charade for 3 weeks. I knew about Sierra. I gestured toward the blonde, who had gone pale. I knew about the lawyer, Hayes, who's right over there in the corner. I pointed, and 100 heads swiveled to stare at the lawyer, who shrank in his chair. And I knew about your plans to make me waive my rights to the condo. Naomi, what are you talking about? Darren tried to interrupt, his voice a strangled whisper. That your plan fell apart, darling, I said, my eyes locking with his. I saw the first flicker of real fear in them. You see, I said, pulling the leather folder from my clutch, you made a tiny, but fatal, mistake. I opened the folder, holding up the first document for all to see. Our condo is not a shared asset. It was a gift from my parents, in my name, before our marriage. I have the official document from the real estate lawyer right here. It is mine, and mine alone. Darren took a step back as if I'd struck him. His face drained of all color. That can't be. And what's more, I continued, my voice rising, triumphant. As I held up the inheritance papers, 3 weeks ago, I received an inheritance from my aunt in Germany. A condo in Munich, another luxury condo in Miami Beach, and over $1 million in cash. The silence was so deep you could hear the ice melting in the glasses. So, I said, my voice dripping with sweet, venomous finality. What property division are you talking about? You'll get half of the cabin and half of your car. Everything else is mine. Sierra, against the wall, looked as if she'd been turned to stone, her face a mask of stunned horror. And now for the fun part, I said with a wry smile. Do you know how much your successful man spent on this little play to publicly humiliate his wife? $45,000 of our joint savings. A wave of outraged murmurs swept through the guests. But I'm not spiteful, Darren, I said, cutting through the noise. You are free. Take your wonderful woman, as you called her, and live wherever you like. I paused, letting the words land like a hammer blow. Just not in my condo. Wait, Darren whispered, his voice breaking. We can talk about this. There is nothing to talk about, I stated, my voice flat and final. I'm filing for divorce tomorrow. Hayes can leave. I don't need him anymore. I turned to the guests, my people, my witnesses. Dear friends, I apologize for ruining your evening, I said, my voice filled with a genuine, profound sorrow. But sometimes, the truth is more important than appearances. Thank you for coming. Now you know who is who. I placed the microphone gently on the table, the sound a soft thud that echoed in the dead silence. And then, without a single backward glance at the ruins of my marriage, I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, I left not a grieving wife, but a detonated bomb. And as I pushed open the heavy ballroom doors, the first screams of the scandal began to erupt. The cool night air of the Georgetown waterfront hit my face like a point. Blessing. It was clean, sharp, and tasted of freedom. I didn't run. I didn't hurry. I walked away from the Watergate Hotel with a steady, measured pace, the sounds of the chaos I had unleashed, fading with each step. I didn't need to see the explosion to know its power. I had lit the fuse, and the design of the bomb was their own. But let me tell you what I left behind, because the reckoning, it turned out, was even more thorough than I could have planned. Inside the glittering ballroom, the silence I left behind did not last. It shattered into 1,000 pieces of outraged noise. Darren stood frozen in the center of the dance floor, a statue of a man watching his entire life go up in flames. The microphone lay at his feet, a dead thing. He was pale, his mouth slightly agape, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrifying comprehension. He had planned a surgical strike, and a nuclear bomb had detonated in his face. The first voice to cut through the din was Mr. Michael Boudreau's. The CEO of Darren's company strode toward him, his face a thundercloud of disgust. "Darren Price," he boomed, his voice easily filling the space without a microphone. "I am deeply, profoundly disappointed in you. After this spectacle, I think we will have to review your position in the company. Immediately." "But Mr. Boudreau," Darren stammered, his hands fluttering helplessly. "You don't understand. It's not what it looks like. Naomi twisted everything." "Twisted?" The word was spat out like a poison dart by Marina, my co-worker. She stood up, her face flushed with anger. "We all heard what you said. 25 years enduring a colorless woman. Aren't you ashamed? You stood there and gutted your wife in front of 100 people. The dam had broken." A chorus of condemnation erupted from all sides. "Darren, you are a complete scoundrel." A woman I recognized as a friend of Celeste's yelled, her loyalty clearly transferred in the face of such monstrous behavior. 25 years and you pull this?" A man shouted. "You're trash." While Darren was the main attraction of the outrage, the supporting cast was not spared. Sierra, finally realizing that her dream of a luxury condo had just evaporated into the thin, expensive air, tried to slip away discreetly. But a furious group of guests, led by some of my staunchest friends, moved to block her path. "And what about you, homewrecker?" one of them snarled. "Did you think stealing another woman's husband would be easy? Have you no shame?" Sierra, her face a mask of panic and indignation, hugged her expensive purse to her chest like a shield. "This has nothing to do with me." "Oh, I think it has everything to do with you," another woman retorted. Across the room, Celeste Price was frantically going from table to table, trying to perform damage control, her voice a reedy, desperate whine. "People, please, you have to see this from his perspective. He was unhappy. He deserved to be happy. But no one was listening." Her social capital, built over decades of careful positioning, had been incinerated in the 5 minutes of my speech. And then, the real fireworks began. Sierra, trapped and humiliated, finally snapped. She pushed her way through the angry guests and marched up to Darren, who was still trying to plead his case to a stony-faced Mr. Boudreau. She shrieked, grabbing his sleeve. "What is going on? You promised me a condo. Where's the money? Where's the life you promised me?" "Shh, Sierra, not here," Darren whispered, his eyes darting around wildly, looking for an escape that didn't exist. "Why not here?" she yelled, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. The entire ballroom fell silent again, captivated by this new act of the drama. "I've been waiting for 3 months. You said we'd live like kings after the divorce. And now what? You don't have a condo, you don't have any money. You fooled me." "Stop it," Darren pleaded, desperation cracking his voice. But Sierra was a runaway train, fueled by fury and shattered greed. She let out a bitter, hysterical laugh and turned to address the rapt audience. "Do you want to know the truth? This successful man promised me riches for 3 months. He bought me this jewelry," she said, gesturing to the diamond necklace at her throat. "With his wife's money, he promised me a huge downtown condo." "Sierra, shut up!" Darren screamed, his face purple with rage and shame. "It's too late," she spat. "And he also took out loans. He used your shared assets as collateral. He thought his stupid wife would never find out." My blood ran cold, even though I was blocks away. I hadn't known about the loans. The depth of his financial betrayal was even worse than I'd imagined. He took $20,000 from Chase Bank and another $15,000 from Wells Fargo. Sierra screamed, carried away by her own venom. "He spent it all on me, on hotels, on gifts, on our future. A future that doesn't exist." The room was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the plush carpet. Celeste, who had been trying to be inconspicuous, rushed forward, her face a mask of horror. Son, what is this woman saying? What loans, what inheritance of Naomi's?" "Mom, now is not the time," Darren mumbled, looking like a little boy caught stealing. "Not the time?" Celeste shrieked, her composure utterly gone. "I mortgaged my mansion to give you money for that lawyer. And now what? How am I going to pay it back?" The final layer of the conspiracy was peeled back. Even his own mother was a victim of his scheme, now facing financial ruin because of his blind avarice. Wait! One of the guests intervened, a man I knew from our neighborhood. "Did I understand correctly? The three of you, your mother, and this woman plan to deceive Naomi?" "No, 3, 4, Sierra injected venomously. "The lawyer, Hayes, too. He was going to make her sign the waiver to the condo." Every head turned to the corner where Hayes had been sitting, but the chair was empty. The lawyer, seeing the ship not just sinking but exploding, had already bolted. The snake had slithered away. "Snake!" Celeste Price shrieked, and in a move nobody expected, she lunged at Sierra, her manicured hands clawing at the younger woman's face. "This is all your fault. You drove my son crazy." "My fault?" Sierra retorted, indignantly shoving the older woman away. "It was your son who groomed me. He told me his wife was a fool, that he'd manipulate her easily. He said she was boring and old." Men rushed forward to separate them as a full-blown catfight nearly broke out in the middle of the ravaged anniversary party. It was a disgraceful, undignified spectacle, the perfect end to their perfect plan. "What a disgrace," a woman said loudly, summing up the feelings of the entire room. Mr. Budrow, who had been watching this entire unfold with a look of utter contempt, spoke again, his voice cutting through the melee. "Mr. Price, doesn't Naomi work for you?" A hush fell. All eyes turned to the CEO. "Yes," he said firmly, "and she is the best controller I've had in 15 years. After this circus, the only thing I'm going to do is raise her salary." He turned his icy gaze to Darren. "And this guy should look for another job. With this reputation, he won't get far." Darren was now pinballing between his hysterical mistress, his furious mother, and a ballroom full of indignant guests, trying desperately to fix something that was irreparably broken. "People, you don't understand," he yelled, his voice cracking. "I have the right to be happy. 25 years is too much." An older woman approached him then, my Aunt Clarice. She stood before him, her face etched with a lifetime of wisdom and disappointment. "And did you ever think about how she felt?" she asked, her quiet voice carrying immense power. "Living 25 years with an egoist like you. Aunt Clarice is right. Other members of my family chimed in. What a disgrace. People like you don't belong in our family. Good thing Naomi found out in time, my cousin Dwayne added, or you would have kept fooling her whole life. The exodus began. First my family, then my co-workers, then our mutual friends. As they filed out, each one delivered a parting shot. Darren Price, after tonight, don't even say you know me, a colleague said on his way out. What a shame for the family, a neighbor muttered, shaking his head. You're trash, one of the men said bluntly as he passed. You exposed your wife like she was a joke. Within half an hour, the beautiful, opulent ballroom was nearly empty. The only people left were the wreckage of the conspiracy, Darren, Celeste, Sierra, and a handful of waiters who were watching with a kind of horrified fascination. The reckoning was complete. Their plan had not just failed, it had backfired in the most spectacular, humiliating way possible. They had been exposed, financially and morally bankrupt, left alone in the ruins of the party they had thrown to celebrate my destruction. And I, Naomi Sterling, was in a taxi, watching the city lights glide past, the keys to my new life heavy and sure in my bag. The battle was over. I had not just survived, I had won. The taxi ride home was a journey through a silent, personal revolution. I didn't cry, I didn't tremble. I sat in the back seat, watching the familiar streets of Georgetown blur past, and felt nothing. It wasn't numbness, it was a profound, all-encompassing peace. The storm had passed. The battle was over. The energy I had spent for weeks on fear, on strategy, on simply holding myself together, had evaporated, leaving behind a clean, hollowed-out calm. The driver, an older man with a kind face, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. Beautiful night, isn't it? I looked out at the city, at the warm glow of the streetlights, and the dark, elegant outlines of the historic buildings. My home. Yes, I said, and a real, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time in months. Very beautiful, you could say it changed my life. That's good, he replied amiably. Some days just change everything. That's exactly right, I whispered, more to myself than to him. Everything changed. When I arrived at my condo, the silence was different from the one I had left. This silence was mine. It was peaceful. It was mine to fill, or not, as I chose. I dropped my clutch on the entryway table, the sound echoing softly. I kicked off my heels and walked barefoot across the cool hardwood floors, my blue dress swishing around my calves. I went straight to the bedroom and began to change. I took off the armor-like dress and pulled on soft, worn cotton pajamas. The transformation was complete. Naomi Price, the betrayed wife, was gone. Naomi Sterling, the survivor, was home. I expected to feel a crashing wave of grief, for the 25 years, for the man I thought I'd married, for the future we'd planned. But it didn't come. The grief had been burned away in the crucible of that ballroom, leaving behind a quiet, steady certainty. I had mourned my marriage while I was still in it. Now, all that was left was the truth. My phone began to buzz. Then it didn't stop. Text messages, calls. News of the scandal was spreading like wildfire. Candace. Oh my God, Naomi, are you okay? We saw everything. You were incredible, Marina. The office is buzzing. Boudreaux is furious with Darren. We're all with you. My Aunt Clarice. My brave, brilliant girl. We are so proud. Call me when you're ready. I read them, a warmth spreading through my chest. I was not alone. I had not just defended myself. I had rallied an army I didn't know I had. I sent a simple group message back. I'm safe, I'm home, I'm okay. Thank you for being there. Then I turned my phone on silent. I was pouring myself a glass of water in the kitchen when I heard a key fumble in the lock. The front door swung open, and Darren stood there. He looked destroyed. His tuxedo was disheveled, his bow tie hanging loose. His face was ashen, his eyes red-rimmed and wild. He looked like he had aged 10 years in the single hour since I'd last seen him. "Naomi," he breathed, his voice ragged. I didn't move. I just leaned against the kitchen counter, sipping my water, and watched him. He stumbled inside, closing the door behind him. The grand, open-plan living room that had been the stage for so many of his lies now felt like a courtroom. "What did you do?" he whispered, his gaze sweeping over me, taking in my calm posture, my pajamas, my utter lack of hysterics. "I told the truth," I said simply. "You ruined me," he said, his voice cracking. "My job, my reputation. Sierra, my mother." "You ruined you, Darren," I replied, my voice flat and calm. "I just turned on the lights so everyone could see the mess you'd made." He sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "It didn't have to be like this," he moaned. "If you had just signed the papers, if you had just been reasonable." The sheer, unadulterated audacity of that statement should have made me scream. Instead, it just solidified my peace. He truly believed that my reasonableness should have extended to allowing myself to be robbed and humiliated without a fight. "There is nothing to discuss, Darren," I said, setting my glass down with a definitive click. "You will pack a bag. Tonight. You will take your things, and you will leave. You are not welcome here." His head snapped up. "You can't just kick me out of my own home." "It is not your home," I said, walking to my desk and pulling out the document from Mr. Perry. I held it up. "It is mine. Legally, unequivocally, mine. If you are not gone within the hour, I will call the police and have you removed for trespassing." The finality in my voice, the cold, hard proof in my hand, broke the last of his fight. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic, bewildered defeat. He was a man who had bet everything on a lie, and the truth had foreclosed on him. He shuffled to the bedroom. I heard drawers opening and closing, the sound of haphazard packing. I didn't follow him. I didn't watch. I didn't care. 20 minutes later, he emerged with a single, overstuffed suitcase. He stood in the doorway, a broken figure. "Where will I go?" he asked, a pitiful question from a man who had always had all the answers. "That," I said, meeting his gaze without a flicker of emotion, "is no longer my problem." He opened his mouth to say something else, but then closed it. There was nothing left to say. He turned, opened the door, and stepped out into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind him. The sound was the official end of my marriage. The next morning, I woke with the Sunday. I felt light. The oppressive weight was gone. I made coffee and took a cup out onto my balcony, looking out over the quiet, waking streets of Georgetown. The city was the same, but I was new. My first call was to Aisha. "I take it the party was eventful," she said, her voice wry. The news had clearly reached her. "You could say that," I replied, a small smile playing on my lips. I gave her a quick rundown of the events, including Sierra's explosive revelation about the loans. "Wow," Aisha breathed. "Even better than I could have scripted." The public meltdown is a gift. It undermines any credibility he might have had left. "Okay, sit tight. I'm drawing up the divorce papers today." With the premarital asset status of the condo and his dissipation of marital funds on an affair, this is going to be very straightforward. He's going to get the cabin and his car, and he's going to be solely responsible for those loans. That's it. "Thank you, Aisha." "Don't thank me yet," she said, her tone turning businesslike. "The legal process is a marathon, not a sprint. But we are in the lead, and he's just tripped over his own shoelaces." My next task was to change the locks. I called a locksmith, who arrived within the hour. As he worked, I felt another layer of security settle into place. Darren Price was officially erased from this home. Then, I went to the bank. I met with Chloe, my financial advisor, and provided her with the details of the loan Sierra had screamed about. "This is gold," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming with professional satisfaction. "We can file a motion to have these debts assigned solely to him. He dissipated marital assets for a non-marital purpose. A judge will not look kindly on that." I authorized her to begin the process of separating all our remaining joint assets, what little was left after his $45,000 party and his mistress fund. The cabin, the car, it would be split down the middle. He could have his half. I wanted no tangible reminders of our life together. When I returned home, there was a courier envelope waiting for me. It was from Aisha. Inside were the divorce papers. I signed them without a moment's hesitation. The ink was dark and final on the page. I packaged them up and sent them by certified mail to Darren's mother's address, the only place I imagined he could have gone. The die was cast. That evening, as I sat in my living room, the silence was no longer empty. It was full of my own breath, my own thoughts, my own future. I opened my laptop and began to browse real estate listings in Miami. Not to buy. Just to look at the balconies, the views of the ocean, the bright, sun-drenched rooms. My future home. The phone rang. It was Celeste. I let it go to voicemail. "Naomi." Her voice was strained, desperate. "Please, we need to talk. This is all a terrible misunderstanding. Darren is devastated. He's staying with me. We can work this out. He's your husband." I deleted the message. There was no misunderstanding. There was only the truth. And the truth had set me free. The aftermath was not about picking up the pieces. It was about sweeping away the debris and laying a new foundation. A foundation made of steel, and truth, and the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I had faced the worst thing I could imagine, and I had not just survived, I had won my life back. 3 months. It's a long time, and yet it can pass in the blink of an eye. For me, those 3 months were a period of profound metamorphosis. The frantic energy of the initial battle gave way to the quiet, steady work of rebuilding. I moved through the world as Naomi Sterling, a name that now felt like my own skin again. The condo, once a place filled with the ghost of a shared life, became truly mine. I packed up Darren's remaining belongings, the expensive cufflinks he'd forgotten, the row of business books he never read, and donated them. I rearranged the furniture. I bought new art for the walls, bold and abstract, nothing he would have ever chosen. With every change, I reclaimed another square foot of my soul. Aisha managed the legal onslaught with the precision of a master general. Darren, now represented by a harried-looking public defender after Hayes dropped him like a hot potato, had no ground to stand on. The evidence was overwhelming. The text messages, the financial records showing the dissipation of funds, the premarital deed for the condo, and the sworn affidavits from guests who had witnessed his public meltdown. And so, on a crisp, clear morning, I found myself walking into a courthouse for the second time in my life. The first time, 25 years ago. I was a hopeful young woman in a simple white dress, clutching Darren's hand. Today, I was a woman in a sharp, charcoal gray pantsuit, walking alone, my head held high. Aisha fell into step beside me, a reassuring presence. "Remember," she murmured as we entered the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallway. "This is just a formality. The outcome is not in doubt. It's about making it official." I nodded. I was ready. We entered the courtroom. It was smaller than I'd imagined, all polished wood and solemn quiet. And there he was. Darren, I almost didn't recognize him. The man sitting at the petitioner's table looked shrunken. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit, a far cry from the custom-tailored armor he used to wear. His hair, always meticulously styled, was now peppered with more gray than I remembered, and it was dull, unkempt. He had aged a decade in 3 months. He looked up as we entered, and his eyes, haunted and weary, met mine for a fleeting second before darting away in shame. His mother, Celeste, sat in the first row of the gallery, her face a rigid mask of bitterness. She refused to look at me. We took our seats. The judge, an elderly woman with sharp eyes behind her spectacles and a no-nonsense demeanor, entered the room. We all rose. "Be seated," she said, her voice crisp and efficient. She began to review the file, her eyes scanning the documents Aisha had so meticulously prepared. The only sounds were the rustle of paper and the frantic tapping of Darren's fingers on the table. After what felt like an eternity, she looked up, her gaze sweeping over both tables. "Very well," she began, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "The court has reviewed the petition for dissolution, the financial disclosures, and all accompanying evidence. The decision is as follows." Darren leaned forward, a desperate hope flickering in his eyes. "The property at 3214 M Street, Georgetown, is deemed the separate, premarital property of the respondent, Mrs. Naomi Sterling, and is not subject to division." Darren flinched as if struck. His public defender simply shrugged, as if he'd expected nothing less. "The cabin property on Deep Creek Lake is considered marital property and shall be divided equally. The same applies to the 2021 Lexus ES 300. Your Honor," Darren's lawyer stood up. "My client used that vehicle for work, for his commute." "Denied," the judge replied dryly, not even looking up from her notes. "The vehicle was purchased with common marital funds. It will be sold, and the proceeds split." She continued, her voice calm and implacable. "Furthermore, it has been proven to the court's satisfaction that the petitioner, Mr. Darren Price, concealed significant debts from his spouse during the marriage. A $20,000 loan from Chase Bank, a $15,000 loan from Wells Fargo, and an $8,000 quick loan. Total debt, $43,000. But those are his personal debts." The young lawyer protested weakly. "According to Family Code Section 3-9, the judge replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Debts incurred during the marriage are presumed to be the responsibility of both parties. However, since the money was not used for family welfare, but for the petitioner's personal affairs, he shall be solely responsible for their repayment." Darren went even paler. He looked like a man who had just been handed a life sentence, $43,000 in debt, all his, on top of losing his job, his reputation, and his home. "This court solemnly decides to dissolve the marriage between Darren Price and Naomi Sterling," the judge concluded, raising her gavel. "The respondent retains the condo and all bank accounts held in her name. The petitioner retains half the cabin's value and half the car's value. No alimony is assigned, as there are no minor children." The gavel struck the sound block with a sharp, final crack. It was over. 25 years, ended by the sound of a wooden hammer. We stood. Aisha squeezed my arm, a small, triumphant smile on her face. "It's done." As we walked out of the courtroom, I felt a strange, profound peace. It wasn't happiness, it was closure. The great, heavy door of my past had been slammed shut, locked, and the key thrown away. "Naomi." "Wait!" I turned. Darren was hurrying after me, his footsteps echoing in the marble hallway. He clutched a folder of documents, his hands trembling. I stopped. Aisha gave me a questioning look, but I nodded for her to go on ahead. She did, waiting for me by the large courthouse doors. "What do you want to say, Darren?" I asked. My voice was calm. There was no anger left, just a distant, faint pity. He stopped a few feet from me, his shoulders slumped. "Forgive me," he said, his voice low and ragged. "I was a selfish fool. A greedy, arrogant fool. You didn't deserve any of what I did to you." I looked at him closely. The expensive suits, the confident swagger, the condescending smiles, it was all stripped away. This was the raw, unvarnished man underneath. Was it sincere remorse? Or was it just the pain of facing the consequences? I thought it might be a little of both. "Darren," I said, my tone even and quiet, I don't hold a grudge. We're just very different people. You wanted an easy life at others' expense. I am used to fighting for what is mine. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Could we? Could we see each other sometimes? As friends? The request was so pathetic, so utterly out of touch with the devastation he had wrought, that it almost made me sad. No, I replied softly, but with an iron firmness that brooked no argument. I'm sorry, but no. It's better if we each go our own way. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked away from him, my heels clicking a steady, final rhythm on the marble floor. I pushed through the heavy doors, leaving the gloom of the courthouse for the bright, free daylight. Aisha was waiting by my car, a new, elegant Audi I had bought with a small part of the German inheritance. A symbol of my new life, my new independence. You okay? She asked. I'm free, I said, and I meant it. I got into the driver's seat. The leather smelled new. The engine purred to life, a quiet, powerful hum. As I pulled away from the curb, I caught one last glimpse of Darren in my rearview mirror. He was still standing, on the courthouse steps. A solitary, broken figure, clutching his folder of lost dreams. I didn't feel joy at his suffering. I didn't feel vengeance. I just felt light. The past was finally, legally, officially behind me. The road ahead was wide open, and for the first time in 25 years, I was the only one holding the map. There is a moment after a great storm, when the last rumble of thunder has faded and the final drop of rain has fallen, that the world holds its breath. The air is washed clean, the light is sharp and new, and everything seems possible. That was the space I entered after the divorce. The battlefield was quiet, the war was over. Now, it was time to build my peace. My first act was to list the Georgetown condo. It was a beautiful space, filled with light and history, but it was no longer my sanctuary. It was a museum of a life I had outgrown. The memories within those walls, both the good and the brutally bad, were too heavy to carry forward. A young couple, their eyes bright with the same hope Darren and I once had, bought it. Watching them sign the papers, I felt no pang of loss, only a quiet satisfaction. I was passing on a home, and in doing so, I was setting myself free. With the proceeds, and the security of my inheritance firmly locked away in my own name, I turned my gaze south, to Miami, to Tante Josephine's investment condo. The first time I walked into that Miami Beach apartment, I knew I was home. It was everything my old life wasn't. Spacious, airy, flooded with a brilliant, unforgiving Florida Sunday. The walls were white, the floors a cool terracotta tile. Through the wall of sliding glass doors, a generous terrace looked out over a turquoise swimming pool, and beyond that, a sliver of the Atlantic Ocean glittered, a constant, dazzling promise. The air smelled of salt and blooming bougainvillea. It was a world away from the dignified, restrained grays of Georgetown. This was color. This was life. I didn't hire a decorator. For the first time in my adult life, I chose every single object, every piece of furniture, every splash of color, based solely on what pleased me. There were no compromises, no discussions, no subtle criticisms about my taste. I filled the space with books, with vibrant art I found in local galleries, with deep, comfortable chairs, meant for losing an afternoon in a novel. I created a haven that was unapologetically, entirely Naomi. And then, I turned to the question that now lay before me, vast and thrilling: what next? I was 50 years old, financially independent, and utterly untethered. The world was mine. The answer came to me not as a thunderclap, but as a quiet, persistent whisper that had been in my heart since college: literature, translation. The magic of finding the perfect word in one language to capture the soul of a word in another. It was a passion I had buried under a mountain of accounting ledgers and corporate reports, a dream deferred for the sensible, stable career. No more. I founded Sterling Editions. The name was a deliberate choice, a reclaiming of my identity. It was a small, niche publishing house dedicated to translating contemporary European literature. I started with a single title, a poignant, overlooked novel by a Swiss-German author about an old watchmaker rediscovering love. It was a quiet story, beautifully told, and it felt like the perfect beginning. The work was all-consuming in the most wonderful way. I was no longer just a controller managing numbers. I was a creator, a curator of stories. I worked with talented, passionate translators. I learned about printing and distribution. I spent hours debating the nuance of a single sentence. It was chaotic, terrifying, and more fulfilling than any bonus or promotion I had ever received. One evening, about 6 months after I'd moved, Aisha came to visit. We sat on my terrace, a soft ocean breeze stirring the pages of the manuscript I was reviewing. "You look different," she said, her gaze taking in my sun-kissed skin, my relaxed posture, the simple linen tunic I wore instead of a business suit. "You look content. Do you feel avenged?" I looked out at the horizon, where the sky was melting into a watercolor of orange and pink. "You know," I replied thoughtfully, "I don't feel vengeance. I feel relief. That wasn't vengeance. I just defended my rights. The truth always wins, even if it takes time." "Do you regret those 25 years?" she asked, voicing the question I knew everyone wondered. "No," I said, shaking my head with a certainty that surprised even me. "Those 25 years taught me something invaluable. To only rely on myself and to value honesty above everything else. They made me the woman who was strong enough to walk away and build this." I gestured around me, at the condo, at the manuscript, at the whole of my new life. My publishing house began to find its footing. We didn't chase bestsellers, we chased meaning. We published a stunning collection of Portuguese poetry, a sharp social satire from Italy, a haunting family saga from Poland. Our readership was small but devoted. We were building something beautiful, one carefully crafted book at a time. One day, my lead editor, a brilliant young woman named Anna, looked up from a contract and said, "Your story is very special, you know. My mom told me she was at that anniversary. She works with your ex-boss. She says there are few women like you." I smiled, a genuine, easy smile. "I don't consider myself a strong woman," I told her. I just decided not to be a victim. The world I was discovering was full of interesting people when you were no longer hiding in the shadow of a man like Darren. I met artists at gallery openings, writers at book fairs, expatriates who had, like me, built new lives in the Sunday I started dating tentatively at first. A charming architect who loved the ocean as much as I did. A history professor with a wry sense of humor. It was light, it was fun, it was on my terms. There was no pressure to build a future, the future was already here, and it was mine. A year after the divorce, I received a letter. The postmark was from his mother's town. My hand was steady as I opened it. "Naomi, I don't know if you'll read this. I just want to say that I understand. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. I lost you because I was foolish and greedy. I don't ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that you deserve the best in the world. Be happy, Darren." I read it once. Then I folded it neatly and filed it away in a drawer in my desk. No anger, no sadness. Just a memory of a past life, a closed book on a shelf. It was an epitaph, not a correspondence. That night, I went out onto the terrace with a cup of tea. Miami glittered below me, a symphony of light and life. Music played softly from a nearby restaurant, and the warm air smelled of salt and night-blooming jasmine. I was free, financially independent, doing what I loved, surrounded by beauty I had chosen for myself. And for the first time in many, many years, I felt not just okay, not just content, but truly, deeply, and completely happy. I had not just survived the end of my world. I had built a new one, a better one, from the ashes. And this world, I knew with every fiber of my being, was only just beginning. 2 years. It's a line in the sand, a before and an after. The dust has long since settled, not just in my life, but in the lives of everyone caught in the blast radius of that silver anniversary. Sometimes, on a quiet afternoon in my Miami office, surrounded by the gentle hum of computers and the soft rustle of manuscript pages, my mind drifts back. Not with pain, but with a kind of quiet curiosity. Whatever happened to? Musing. I heard through the grapevine, the kind that winds its way from Washington, D.C. to Miami, through old colleagues and well-meaning friends, that Darren is still driving his taxi. The Camry is older now, more worn, a perfect mirror of its driver. He and Celeste still share that small apartment, a mother and son bound together not by affection, but by shared failure and financial necessity. Their world, once so expansive and focused on status, has shrunk to the size of a living room. I'm told he rarely speaks, and when he does, it's only of practical, immediate things. The big dreams, the future plans, the arrogance, all of it was burned away. He is a man living a life of quiet consequence. Sierra, true to form, divorced the restaurateur after 18 months. The prenuptial agreement, however, was ironclad. She walked away with some jewelry and a hefty dose of reality, but not the fortune she'd banked on. The last I heard, she had moved to Los Angeles, chasing a new dream, her polished surface perhaps a little more chipped, her eyes a little harder. She was a leaf blown from one branch to another, never finding a tree strong enough to hold her weight. But this story was never really about them, not in the end. It was always about the woman I became in the process of losing the woman I was supposed to be. My life now is a tapestry woven from threads I chose myself. Sterling Editions has found its footing. We're not a giant in the publishing world, and that's precisely the point. We are a respected, beloved niche publisher. We've won a few small awards. We've introduced English-speaking audiences to a brilliant, reclusive Portuguese novelist and rediscovered a forgotten Swiss playwright. The work is meaningful. It feeds my soul in a way a corporate balance sheet never could. I have a balcony, not just in Miami, but in the Munich condo. I inherited a classic, elegant apartment in Schwabing, filled with Tante Josephine's beautiful, old-world furniture. I travel there twice a year. I sit in her favorite chair, look out at the linden trees, and feel a connection to the fierce, independent woman who, without ever knowing it, handed me the keys to my own freedom. And I have friends. Real ones. Aisha visits me in Miami every few months. We still laugh about the moment Sierra exposed the loans. A gift from the karma gods, Aisha calls it. Candace and Marina came down for a long weekend, and we spent 3 days laughing on the beach, their unwavering support a constant in my new world. One evening, I was giving a small talk at a local bookstore about the challenges and joys of literary translation. Afterward, a man approached me. He was around my age, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He'd enjoyed the talk, he said. He was a marine biologist, in town for a conference. We talked for an hour about books, about the ocean, about nothing and everything. His name was David. We had dinner the next night, and the night after. It was easy. There were no games, no hidden agendas. He was fascinated by my story, not as a scandal, but as a journey of resilience. He saw the strength in it, not the damage. It's been 6 months now. It's not a whirlwind romance. It's something quieter, steadier. It's the comfort of sharing a coffee in the morning, the excitement of showing him a new manuscript I love, the simple peace of walking along the shore, hand in hand. With David, I am not the woman who was betrayed. I am the woman who built a publishing house. The woman who speaks 3 languages. The woman who isn't afraid of the future. I was in my office last week, finalizing the cover for our upcoming release, when my assistant brought in the mail. Among the bills and manuscripts was a postcard. It was a simple, generic photo of the Washington, D.C. skyline. There was no return address. On the back, in a familiar, now shakier handwriting, were just 2 words, "You won." It was from Darren. I held the postcard for a long moment, looking at those two words. They weren't bitter, they sounded resigned, final. An acknowledgement from a general on the losing side of a war he, himself, had started. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity. I felt a chapter, one I hadn't realized was still slightly open, click firmly, peacefully shut. I pinned the postcard to the corkboard above my desk, next to a photo of my team laughing at our last launch party and a sketch David had drawn of a sea turtle. It became just another artifact of a life fully lived. A reminder of the terrain I had crossed to get here. That night, I stood on my terrace, the warm Miami breeze tangling my hair. The city was a constellation of lights, the ocean a vast, dark mystery humming with life. The air smelled of salt and blooming hibiscus. My story, the one that began with a whisper in the dark, didn't end with a victory in a courtroom or a scandal at a party. It didn't even end when I signed the divorce papers. It simply transformed. It transformed into this moment. Into this woman, standing in the light of her own making, no longer defined by a man's betrayal, but by her own courage to rebuild. The truth did more than just conquer the lie. It built a new reality from the rubble. A reality of purpose, of peace, of chosen love, and of a happiness that is deep, quiet, and entirely my own. And as I looked out at the endless, star-dusted horizon, I knew with every fiber of my being that my story, the real story, was only just beginning. There is a peculiar kind of silence that follows the end of a great noise. It's not an empty silence, but a full one, pregnant with the echoes of what has passed and the possibilities of what is to come. In the 3rd year after the divorce, I learned to live inside that silence, and I found it was not my enemy, but my greatest teacher. The postcard from Darren remained pinned to my corkboard. It became a curious artifact, a fossil from a previous geological era of my life. Visitors would sometimes glance at it, their eyes lingering on the stark message, "You won." My editor, Anna, once asked me about it. I simply said, "It's a reminder that some battles are worth fighting." She nodded, understanding without needing the full, painful history. That, I realized, was another gift of my new life. I was no longer defined by that story. It was a part of me, but it was not the whole. David and I settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as the tide. He had a research vessel that went out for weeks at a time, studying coral bleaching in the Caribbean. I had my publishing deadlines and my trips to Munich. We cherished our time together, but we also cherished our independence. There was no clinging, no desperate need to merge lives completely. We were two whole people choosing to share our journeys. Sometimes, we would sit on my terrace for an entire Sunday, reading in a companionable silence that was the absolute opposite of the tense, watchful quiet of my marriage. This silence was a blanket, not a shroud. It was during one of David's research trips that I decided to finally do something I'd been contemplating for over a year. I flew to Munich, but this time, it wasn't for business. I went to Tante Josephine's grave. The cemetery was on the outskirts of the city, old and peaceful, dotted with ancient linden trees. I found her headstone, a simple, elegant slab of dark granite. Josephine Schmidt. Geliebte Tante und Freundin, beloved aunt and friend. I laid a small bouquet of white roses at the base of the stone and sat on a nearby bench. The only sound was the wind rustling the leaves. "Thank you," I whispered to the quiet air. The words felt inadequate for the debt I owed this woman I had known mostly through letters. "You saved me." And as I sat there, surrounded by the profound German stillness, I understood that her gift wasn't just the money or the properties. It was the permission. The permission to be audacious, the permission to fail, the permission to build a life that was wildly, unapologetically my own. She had lived that way, and in her death, she had passed the baton to me. Back in Miami, my life continued to unfold in ways I could never have scripted. Sterling Editions was approached by a major distributor, a move that would put our books in stores across the country. It was a risk, more overhead, more pressure, but the old Naomi, The cautious accountant was no longer in charge. The new Naomi, the publisher, saw the opportunity. I took the leap. The day we signed the contract, I took my small team out for champagne. We toasted in my sun-drenched living room, the ocean our backdrop. Looking at their excited, hopeful faces, Anna, the two interns, the freelance translators who had become like family, I felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with creation. We were building something beautiful together. Later that week, I was having dinner with David at a little seafood shack on the water, our feet in the sand, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from D.C. I saw the article in Publishers Weekly about Sterling editions. Congratulations, it's what you always wanted. It took me a moment to place the number. It was Michael Boudreau, my former CEO, the man who had fired Darren. I hadn't spoken to him since my resignation. "Thank you, Michael," I typed back. "That means a lot." His response was immediate. "You were always the most capable person in the room, Naomi. We miss your sharp eye, but I'm glad you found your passion." I put my phone down, a slow smile spreading across my face. It was an absolution I hadn't known I needed. Not from Darren, but from the professional world I had left behind. It was a final, gentle stitch, closing the last open wound. David watched me, his head tilted. "Good news?" "The best kind," I said. "Validation from a past life. It's like getting a letter from a ghost, telling you you're on the right path." He reached across the table and took my hand. His skin was weathered from the sun and salt, a testament to his own chosen path. "You never needed it," he said simply, "but I'm glad you got it." As the months turned into the third year, the echoes of my old life grew fainter, replaced by the vibrant, present-tense music of the new. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Celeste had suffered a minor stroke. There was a fleeting moment of something, not sympathy, exactly, but a distant recognition of a shared humanity. I sent flowers to the hospital, anonymously. It wasn't for her. It was for me. A final act of releasing the bitterness, of proving to myself that I held no more poison in my heart. Darren, I was told, was her primary caregiver. The irony was not lost on me. The son she had conspired with to secure his future was now her only future, trapped with her in that small apartment, their shared resentment a third, unwelcome occupant. It was a sad, closed loop. A life of quiet desperation. My life was anything but quiet desperation. It was loud with laughter during team meetings, serene with the focus of editing a difficult passage, joyful with the discovery of a new author. It was filled with the sound of the ocean, with David's stories of whale songs and bioluminescent plankton, with the clink of wine glasses with new friends. One evening, I was walking alone on the beach, the pink twilight settling over the water. I thought about the long, winding road that had led me here, the naive young woman in love, the hopeful bride, the grieving, childless wife, the betrayed woman, the strategist, the survivor, and now, the creator, the lover, the free woman. I had thought the climax of my story was that night at the Watergate, the public reckoning. But I was wrong. That was just the catalyst. The real story was everything that came after. The slow, patient, often terrifying work of building a new life from the ground up. The truth had not just set me free, it had given me a blueprint. It had forced me to look at the foundation of my own soul and decide what was worth keeping and what needed to be torn down. I had kept my integrity, my resilience, my capacity for love. I had torn down my need for external validation, my tolerance for disrespect, my fear of being alone. The silence now was not the enemy, it was my companion. It was the space where I could hear my own thoughts, my own desires, my own heartbeat. It was the fertile ground where new dreams could take root. I reached the end of the beach and turned to look back at the lights of my building, at my home. A sense of profound, unshakable peace settled over me. This was my life. not a reaction to someone else's, but a proactive, passionate creation. The echoes of the past were just that, echoes, faint, distant, and powerless. The silence of the present was full, rich, and entirely my own. And I knew, with a certainty that felt as solid as the earth beneath my feet, that the best chapters were still unwritten. 4 years to the day after I walked out of the Watergate Hotel, I found myself standing on a different kind of stage. This one was draped in deep blue velvet, flanked by potted palms, and looked out over a crowd of faces illuminated not by crystal chandeliers, but by the soft, golden glow of track lighting. The air smelled of old paper, binding glue, and anticipation. I was at the Miami Book Fair, about to accept a small but meaningful award for Sterling Editions, the Emerging Voice Prize for our work in bringing European literature to a wider audience. The leather folder I held now was not filled with evidence of betrayal, but with the acceptance speech I had written myself. My hand was steady, my heart was full. As I waited to be introduced, my gaze swept over the audience. David sat in the third row, his camera in his lap. He'd insisted on documenting this. Next to him were Aisha, who had flown down for the occasion, and my entire small team, their faces beaming with a pride that mirrored my own. This was my constellation now, not a society built on appearances and lies, but a universe of genuine connection and shared purpose. The moderator finished her introduction. And so, it is my great pleasure to welcome to the stage the founder and publisher of Sterling Editions, Naomi Sterling. The applause was warm, enveloping. I stepped to the podium, the gentle weight of the microphone a familiar friend now, not an instrument of battle. "Thank you," I began, my voice clear and carrying easily through the quiet room. 4 years ago, my life looked very different. If you had told me then that I would be standing here, surrounded by friends, celebrating the success of a publishing house I built from scratch, I would have thought you were telling someone else's story. A soft, knowing murmur rippled through the crowd. Many of them knew my story, not in its sordid details, but in its essence, a story of reinvention. Sterling Editions was born from a few simple truths I learned the hard way. I continued, my eyes finding David's, then Aisha's. That your past does not have to dictate your future. That the things that break you can also be the things that forge you into something stronger. And that the most powerful stories are not always the loudest ones, but often the quiet, nuanced voices that need a little help to be heard. I spoke about Tante Josephine, the fierce, independent woman whose legacy had been my launching pad. I spoke about the magic of translation, of finding the soul of a story in one language and giving it a new voice in another. I did not mention Darren or Celeste or Sierra. They were footnotes in my history, not characters in this chapter. As I spoke, I felt the final, gossamer threads of that old life dissolve into nothing. This was who I was now. Not a victim, not an avenger, but a creator. A builder. After the ceremony, as we all stood in a loose circle, drinking wine and laughing, Aisha slipped her arm through mine. "Look at you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just get a divorce, Naomi. You got an upgrade. On everything." Later that night, back in my condo, David and I sat on the terrace. The award, a simple crystal obelisk, sat on the table between us, catching the moonlight. "Are you happy?" he asked, his voice quiet. I looked at him, at the kind lines around his eyes, at the easy way he inhabited his own skin. I looked past him, at the glittering Miami skyline, at the dark, rhythmic pulse of the ocean. I felt the quiet hum of satisfaction from a day's work I loved, the deep comfort of true friendship, the thrilling uncertainty of a future I was still designing. "This," I said, gesturing to all of it, to him, to me, "this is more than happiness. Happiness is a feeling. This is a state of being. It's peace. It's purpose. It's freedom." He nodded, understanding completely. "It looks good on you." The next morning, I went for a long, early walk on the beach, as had become my ritual. The sun was just cresting the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of rose and gold. My phone, tucked in my pocket, buzzed. It was an email from Anna. The pre-orders for our next title, a stunning Finnish epic, had just surpassed all our projections. Attached was a mock-up of the cover. It was perfect. I stopped walking, letting the cool water wash over my feet. I thought about the long, winding road, the 3 a.m. whisper that had started it all, the terrifying plunge into the unknown, the sheer, bloody-minded will it had taken to rebuild. I had thought the story was about a shocking betrayal and a public reckoning. But I was wrong. That was just the inciting incident. The real story was about what a woman discovers about herself when everything she thought was solid ground crumbles beneath her feet. It was about the resilience of the human spirit. It was about the audacity to choose joy after profound pain. A pelican soared overhead, its silhouette stark against the brightening sky. It dove into the water, emerging a moment later with a silver fish in its beak. Life, in all its brutal and beautiful simplicity, went on. My story, the one that had been written for me, the wife, the victim, was over. It had ended the moment I took that microphone from Darren's hand. The story I was living now was one I was writing myself, day by day, word by word. A story of a woman who learned to be her own hero. A story that was finally, and forever, her own. I turned away from the water and started back toward my home, my footsteps firm in the wet sand. The sun was warm on my back. The day was new, full of promise. Behind me, the waves continued their eternal rhythm, washing the shore clean, ready for whatever came next. The end of one story is always the beginning of another. And mine was just getting started. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.